Oh, hi, everyone. Welcome to the podcast. And I want to welcome my guest today. This is Ash Arnwine from Nylas. Thanks for coming on the podcast.
Sid, thanks for having me. We first met at an event here in New York about a year ago, and since then I had the privilege of bumping into you kind of in various places around the world at different conferences since then, and most recently last week. So thanks
Yeah.
for the invite.
Oh, sure. It was nice to be in Austin with you last week at the API Summit. And we can talk more about that as we get on in the podcast. You can tell me all about what you were sharing with developers last week. But before we get into that, I do want to give you a chance to introduce yourself to the listeners. You're currently the Director of Developer Relations at Nylas. So let's start with your background. What was your journey that brought you to Nylas and this leadership role as a director?
So windy over time that I won't go all the way back, but I think I will start with about 10 years ago. I came to New York to do a coding boot camp. I was living in Osaka, Japan at the time. I'd been in Japan for about 10 years, and just came here to shore up some what I felt like were gaps in my fundamental knowledge of like how to code. I'd been scripting in different ways for a long time. Shout out to WordPress, that was one of my gateway drugs into programming. Uh, and yeah, I came here, spent 3 months doing that, spent another 3 months being a teaching fellow at the boot camp. And then during that process, got offered a job at Adobe to do developer relations. And they were really looking for someone that had previous management experience because they knew that revamping the Creative Cloud developer platform was going to be a multi-year thing that we needed to kind of set some strategy, try a few things, and then hire up a team. So I spent almost 6 years there leading that team within Adobe Creative Cloud. And then pandemic hit. It just kind of felt like it was time for a change, and Nylas had reached out. And the more I dug into it, the more I thought, oh, this is a place where I feel like I can offer some value. The API platform was super interesting, and I thought maybe this is something that like we can communicate more directly to developers than the company was doing at the time. So yeah, I've been here at Nylas for about 2.5 years now.
Okay. And when you were at Adobe, were you working with APIs there and that kind of translated to Nihilus?
Yeah, I guess in some ways there certainly. I mean, one of the things I'll go back to, talk to folks about all the time. It's like it's never a bad idea to invest in learning a hard skill of some kind. And yeah, so there are, let's say for example, like inside of Photoshop. Uh, 10 years ago, there were umpteen layers of different APIs under the surface in there that developers could take advantage of. Surely you've heard of plugins and extensions and scripts
Sure.
inside of Photoshop, and all of those apps have that. So there wasn't so much of a unifying like common API layer inside. So over the time, our product team worked to revamp that whole API layer inside of the app. So when I say API layer in this case, this is like you're not really talking to the cloud per se. These were like building plugins to manipulate what's on the screen, what's in the application. And then over time, we started seeing more opportunity to work on cloud APIs as well. It's the way we talked about them, but in our world, that's APIs. Generally speaking, it's like some kind of API call that's going over the network. So there were kind of that balance of what we would call like our in-app extensibility, and then cloud APIs. So yeah, sure, that definitely in a number of ways contributed to being able to make the switch to Nihilus. But the reality is, I feel like every API platform is kind of its own unique beast. So very rarely are you going to jump into something new and find that, I'm doing exactly what I was doing at the last place.
Yeah, I've definitely experienced that with the different companies I've worked with. I'm sure we could spend an hour talking about Adobe and the technology stack and how developers work with that, but I'm a little more curious about what you're doing today. Nihilus, um, I don't know if the name you might be able to reveal like intuits what you guys do, but maybe you could give us a breakdown of what Nylas is all about and kind of maybe how the name relates to this product and the APIs you offer.
Oh, that's a great question, and I should have an answer for that. I do not. To my knowledge, the name doesn't, but maybe I'll be corrected later. Honestly, Nihilus is our name. We have a mascot called Nyla that's an astronaut that we use on everything. But what we do under the hood is we connect developers to all of the email and calendar providers out there in the world. So it's a single layer that lets you authenticate your users' accounts for Gmail, Outlook, Apple, Yahoo, whatever. And from there, the way I like to talk about it is like we're making email and calendar programmable, essentially, on behalf of the user. So what does that mean? You can, for example, pull in going to last week's demo, which we may touch on later. You can pull in a bunch of emails from your own Gmail account, and then put those into an LLM and get some summaries about your emails without having to read everything word for word. But lots of people use it for different things. Applicant tracking systems use it for making it possible for recruitment teams to have a whole team interacting with a candidate as opposed to just single one-off emails. We see usage in all sorts of verticals like CRMs, for example, and kind of anywhere that email and scheduling would be useful, you'll find us there.
Yeah, I imagine that your APIs could be really useful creating products that we use in our day-to-day work. I'm a HubSpot user, so HubSpot does things through my Gmail. It kind of can track conversations with different contacts. And I also use Calendly. But now I'm seeing a lot of other people like HubSpot and other Gmail. I think Google Calendars even has some appointment booking capabilities. So are there other use cases that I'm missing that you guys find our developers are really resonating with?
Yeah, so I think, for example, like in one, the scheduling thing is like a really good example, but I think where we would be differentiated from other players in the market is we're not really B2C, right? Like you wouldn't have an end user come up and say, we're going to set up a Nylas scheduler. Instead, we're really focused on the developer. So the developer can bake in, for example, we have a new scheduler component, a front end component that we'll be having out in the market pretty soon, updated to our latest version of the API, which recently launched. And the whole idea there is that developers can then take that and put it into their application, and it's just part of their application as far as the user is concerned. So that's certainly a use case. But in addition to that, things like being able to read in emails and parse them, just kind of, handling different, let's say like use cases around being able to auto-generate email responses and the like. I mean, really, the sky's the limit. It's a full CRUD REST API that'll let you kind of, if you can imagine it, you can do it with the email and the calendar.
Yeah, and if I'm understanding correctly, what one of the real values that you're delivering developers would be the fact that I don't want to have to integrate with Outlook and with Gmail and with X, Y, and Z. You provide this layer of abstraction across those for the developers because they don't know what their customers will be using for their email or calendar clients, right?
Yeah, 100%. The requirement to go in and like learn all of those APIs, and then it's not build and then you shipped an integration with all the service providers. That's never the case. So if you're going to support multiple service providers out there, like now you're making a commitment to keep those up to date forever.
Yeah.
You're also making a commitment to handle all the rough edge cases that we can do for you. And you just really, say, for example, grab a Node SDK if you're a Node.js developer, and it's all the same API call. Just depends on the account or the type of account. Like you don't really have to mess with that if you don't want to.
Yeah. So this podcast is about building developer experiences, and we define that really broadly. And you're working on developer relations, but I imagine there's some parts of the developer experience that you would say that you're the owner or your team is the owner of. What kind of things fall into your bucket, would you say?
Yeah, absolutely. I assume this comes up a lot, right? But the term developer experience, like, I don't think it's not a novel insight at this point that like that means something different to everyone who says it. I'm sure most of your guests say that. And so it's really interesting to kind of like poke under the hood and see what's there. Developer relations really kind of focuses on a number of different things. I guess first I should just say that at Nylas, the way we've structured it is we have the developer documentation team and we have the developer advocacy team. We're a pretty small team, but I think, small but mighty. We get a lot done for our developers in different ways. So let's just take documentation as one example, like relatively easy to imagine, but we just launched a new version of our API, and we need to update all the docs for that, right? It's a new version of the whole platform. That's all. So
That's all.
that's all. So like there was a lot that went into getting the documentation ready for that, and our staff technical writer Laura was actually there with me at Austin API Summit last week talking about how to work with documentarians, which is a subject that's very near and dear to my heart, because I think you don't give your documentarians a seat at the table to your own peril, and that's actually a situation that a lot of companies will find themselves in. So I'm happy that we've been able to make a space for them to really give them agency to be a part of the process. So what does that mean? Well, I'll just use the example of the scheduler that we're currently working on. The product manager in charge of that reached out very early in the process, wanting to talk to the docs team about naming conventions inside of that component. That is the right answer in my book. It's not to say that we're saying, hey, docs team, you name this stuff, and instead it's more like you have a seat at the table. This is the important thing, and they can bring a whole different perspective to how we want to ship the ergonomics of this component, so to speak. So I think that's a pretty important one, just the documentation in general. On the developer advocacy side, I think a big part of the experience is more like finding the developer, getting them interested in Nylas, and getting them a quick win, whatever that means. And we've actually just launched our developer forums in the last couple of months. And I'm sure you've been a part of the process of like launching something like that before, like a new community surface. But when you start, it's just like we were starting from zero, and you just hold your breath and hope that this matters to anybody and it will help them, right? And if it doesn't, we would course correct. But the reality is, we are actually, even today, someone was commenting in our Slack about we're starting to see an uptick in actual people coming in and asking questions or offering answers and the like. And we have an RSS feed in our Slack channel for the forums. And so starting to see that activity crop up is great. How that boils down to developer experience, though, I think, in my mind, DX is often, if we can find a good way to quantify it, we want to do that. And for us, the first thing on the forum side is really just like time to first response. We'll get to some other things later, but the reality is someone has come into this empty place, this new community forum, and they've asked a question, they've put themselves out there. Like, we want to say, hey, thanks for the question. Like, let's look into this. Can you tell me a little bit more about what you're doing? That kind of thing.
Yeah.
And that's kind of one of the ways that we're trying to keep a quantifiable metric on that.
Yeah. And when it comes to your forum, sounds like your developer advocates are out there engaging with the community. Do you also have some dedicated support people that are involved?
We do. And so it's really, that's cool that you asked that, because I think this has come up in both in my past role at Adobe and at Nylas, where trying to make sure that no one gets lost in that experience of like, wait, where do I go to ask this question is really important. And at Nylas, until recently, we didn't have forums. We've always had premium support. So our customers have a team they can go and talk to, that are SLA bound and all of that kind of good stuff. And So that's one of the things we make it a point to call out at the top of the forums is like, hey, this is for, you want to put a question out there and kind of engage in the open, feel free. But at the same time, developers sometimes are going to have to ask questions that just can't be public for whatever reason. And just due to the nature of their integration, or maybe not wanting to give away some sort of new feature set in front of potential competitors or whatever it might be. And our support team is a fantastic resource for those situations and so much more. So I think that one of the key developer experience in terms of user flow areas that you have to consider when you are first launching either your support or your forums and then adding the other one to the mix is the worst thing ever is like if you're in a Slack, or if you go to somebody's Zendesk or whatever and you ask a question and then the response is wrong place for this, please file this question over here. We
Oh,
never want to have that, right? Like just meet people where they are, shake every hand where they are.
yeah,
But at the same time, like, for our customers, if they're expecting SLA bound support, like we just want to make sure that they're in the right place, and we're making efforts to do that.
yeah. You mentioned Slack. So does that mean that you have a community Slack where your customers can join and have real-time interactions with you, or is this an internal Slack where you're getting the notifications?
That's the internal Slack where we get the notifications. I have lived every sort of permutation of shells, who knows, emails, whatever, Twitter support, and all of those kind
Yeah,
of things over the time. And my point of view on this is, look, if again, meet people where they are. If they find you and they ask a question, just get them the answer, whatever that means, right? And if part of the answer means like, well, we really need you to come over here because this is a support question, we want to make sure that we can give you the information you need without making it public, that's something we will do. But otherwise, one, we want to meet people where they are, but two, we want to offer a strong point of view on what the path is.
yeah,
So from my point of view, at Nylas, our best bet was to not do a Discord, and they can go very well. But the expectation that you build, to especially if you're a small team, just really isn't healthy for a team in
yeah,
at least in my lived experience. And so, we just wanted to have a nice like forum software. We use Discourse, which I'm sure you've come across at some point.
oh yeah,
Yeah. Discourse is great. We used it at Adobe as well, and just a big fan because they got an API, they give
yeah,
you all the analytics. It's like just all the things that you would want, all the user management, all those kinds of things. It's great. You can theme it if you like, and all those kinds of things. So, but the main reason is really just that, like, we want to present a public place to talk to us that doesn't imply that we are always there.
yeah.
And if we can do that, that sets the right expectation when the developer asks the question.
Yeah. I love that philosophy of meeting the developers where they're at. In a previous role, I was working with a pretty robust app partner program with a marketplace, and I had and you have to have judgment, right, when to go and meet. And I had a customer contact us through some channel that they were having a problem with an app partner, and they said that the data was not their data. And I was like, boy, that sounds really crazy. But then I was like, let me contact the app partner. And the app partner swore up and down there was no way this could happen. And then I don't know if it was on a follow up call, but it turned out their server had crashed. Somehow the session variables had gotten mixed up, and this person actually had done a sync and had moved data through the API from another customer into their app. And they apologized up and down, but like, if I hadn't gotten on the call and tried to investigate on behalf of the customer, we would have never really known how bad the issue was and that how urgent it was to get it addressed. So meeting customers and developers where they're at, and giving your team that ability to make judgment calls is really critical, I think.
100%. And wow, as someone who just like literally implemented Redis for sessions into a demo app last night. Like that particular problem is terrifying to me. Wow. I'll go
Yeah.
double check what I wrote in the codes.
Yeah, yeah. Um, I don't even remember the stack or what was going on. It was so many years ago, but
Sure.
yeah. Uh, Something you talked about with documentarians that I want to circle back on, which I'm always curious about, which is the workflow and how collaboration is enabled between engineers, documentarians, developer advocates, anyone who might want to fix a typo or add new documentation. Like, how are you managing that at Nylas? What kind of tools, what kind of workflows, that sort of thing?
Yeah, so first, the docs at Nylas are internally open source. We haven't made them public, partly because we inherited a repo that we feel like we'll probably outgrow, go through and open source it publicly. But in terms of internally, people can jump in and one thing we had to deal with recently was like, if you don't want sort of the ability for anybody to come in and just merge stuff just cuz I think there's something about docs sometimes that can really get people kind of flustered if they just perceive like this one thing that they need to fix, or just go in and do it. So we really want to, we've set it up to where there has to be a review by
Yep.
someone on the docs team, or myself, before it gets merged. And there's really no other way to get something merged than having passed that very light hurdle, right? I really don't want to ever drop a ton of process on internal stakeholders who are trying to do the right thing. But we just need enough time to, like in a startup environment, I talk a lot about the difference between like stimulus and response, right? Uh, it's very easy to have a stimulus and then immediately respond, immediately react. And what I'm trying to coach our team on, and hopefully others internally as well, is like, we got to move fast. Yes, we have to have urgency, but like there is an important role to be played in like not being totally reactive all the time. And really the best way to enforce that is just to have the tools be the bad guy, so to speak. But that's one way that we work with folks. I think but also just the understanding of like who plays what role in a given initiative. Uh, Again, if you work in a small environment, sometimes that's kind of not always entirely clear because you're just moving so fast. But one of the things that I'm increasingly doubling down on is the idea that we really want timelines and milestones and those kinds of things to be set within the context of a product manager's roadmap. So, in other words, while engineering, for example, can be like really good at identifying, certain issues or whatever that we might need to do, it's really important to have the PM in the middle to coordinate all of that. And it's when we adhere to that process that we get it right. When we kind of start lobbing things back and forth from one org to another and just trying to sort of put out fires that may not actually be fires, like that's when we get into trouble. So I'm really happy that that's the direction we've been able to start moving in, let's say, like the last half year with the docs team. And just making sure that the docs team understands that like you're working in the context of the product management, because ultimately they're the ones that are coordinating shipping uh shipping a product. So that's been a key area. I think that one of the other areas that just, or I guess it's similar, but I'm sure you've heard of like a DOSI framework or a ROSI framework before. Like, so DOSI would be like driver, approver, contributor, informed, like those kinds of things.
Yeah.
I literally just got off a call where our support team was giving me some feedback on, hey, y'all made a bunch of changes to the docs, you didn't tell us. And I'm like, yeah, you're right, you did do that. And that's like currently like in this quarter, that's something I'm working on our team with. You can do that, get people to have the buy-in. You don't have to lead with authority, but make sure that, just like influence folks to be a part of things that they care about. Note who your contributors are, who are your approvers, who needs to be informed. And again, doesn't have to be a heavy process. Literally write it in your wiki page and then
Yeah.
make sure that the person has seen that their name is on there, and will get way better results.
Nice. Nice. Yeah. Stakeholder management is critical. When I've talked to other folks about tools that they might use, Like in the past, I've had documentation that was a WordPress website or headless CMS like Contentful. I've seen implemented. Static site generators are quite popular. And when you say GitHub, I think Markdown files. Um, can you share any more about like how your changes, once they're reviewed, how do they get generated or published for your community?
Oh, it's incredibly short and simple. Basically, someone puts in a PR, they ask for a review, they assign potential reviewers, someone grabs it. We have another Slack channel that just takes in all those PRs, and so people can grab it there, and then just handle the feedback back and forth on the PR,
Yeah.
the pull request, and then once it's merged into main, we're live. So it's just the lightest of processes. The thing that we have in the middle to be able to see like what might this look like in prod is like we have a Cloudflare page that it pushes to.
Okay.
So if you submit a PR, that'll automatically be built. That's essentially our staging environment. So go through, look, make sure everything's okay, give your feedback if there is any, and then once you're good, merge, and then we move on.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, I think in my last company, I think we were staging sort of situation where we could get a preview of what the docs were going to look like with the change we just made before we actually went live with it. It's always nice to have a little sense check that what you've done actually is how you want it to look in the end, right?
I have been in environments where that wasn't possible, and wow, do you get some surprises? I mean, I think the worst surprises for anybody working on something like that are around maybe a couple of things. Occasionally, you'll just like destroy the layout, right? Somehow.
Yeah.
So that's one. But the other one is like 404s, right? Like you just don't want that, like in handling your redirects and all those kinds of things. So again, our Laura, who's our staff technical writer, she's just been working this week on putting some scripting around our redirects game to be able to do things like identify redirect loops, which is like how would anybody do that visually when if you have, I don't know, 50 100 redirects inside of a file as things move around. So the tooling around stuff like that's important. And since we're a Docs code team, the cool thing is like that isn't, that starts, I think if your early career, it can start with like, I'm going to learn how to use Git, work in an IDE to craft Markdown. And that's kind of my level of interacting with the sort of quote unquote code side of things. But I like to see folks that as they advance, like can own their doc stack, so to speak. And I think we have a team that everybody at their respective level on the team is like, they're at the right place for that. So if we need to script something, I can jump in and do it, but I don't have to because folks can handle that on their own.
That's great. Now, you've alluded to a new version of your API was launched, and I actually saw this, I think, on a press release. It was such a big announcement for you guys. Can you tell us about what this V3 release is about, and sort of how what does it actually mean for your developer community?
Yeah, so I'll start with just like going back to that word developer experience again, because I
Yeah.
was just having a conversation with Isaac, who I report to. He's our SVP of product, and yesterday about like what does developer experience mean, and for him, he's like actually putting a pretty tight, very narrow definition on it, which is like it's the code, it's how the code feels to the developer, and how the building feels, right? So I think for me, I definitely have a broader interpretation, but there's something about that I like, because at the end of the day, like, you can put all the band-aids on top, but like at the end of the day, if the core sort of coding experience isn't great, like developers are going to find you out. So that's what our V3 has been all about. It's about revamping the API surface to more kind of like to support smoother workflows for the developer. It's about rewriting our SDKs, a topic I know is near and dear to your heart, that, in a way that are more like, that are closer to the vernacular of developers. Like I use our Node SDK, like I'm a Node.js person. And I'm obviously biased, but like this SDK is just way more fun than our V2 was. Like it's just feels like oh yeah, like the person who wrote this understands who I am as a developer. It's part of my flow and I'm not working against it, which is great. In terms of just like the performance, it's just so much faster. And also it really, one of the coolest things about it is like, if you think about like the types of data we're working with, right? Email and calendar, it can be really sensitive stuff in there. And the cool thing is that we don't have to be like the middleman in terms of like a storage layer anymore. We're really moving the communication as fast as we can, but like we don't have to deal with that sort of like, but yeah, where are my emails being stored? Like that's no longer a conversation we have to have with developers, because it's really just like we're connecting you to the service provider between you and your application. So for me, like these are all really cool things that come pretty close to like what you might call, I don't know if you've ever been a Mac person or not, but there's like that world of like the Snow Leopard release that happened in the aughts, where it's like we had a OS called Leopard, now we're going to ship Snow Leopard, and it's just going to be way better than Leopard was, but not just like, a ton of new bells and whistles. Like we're shoring it up, and that's what this API has been about. But this release has been about. And the cool thing is I keep going back to so yeah, and we're getting great feedback from developers. I have a meetup that I organize at a coffee shop here on Thursday mornings in my neighborhood, and I was talking to an iOS developer this morning who was just like really not he was excited about our docs, which I feel kind of silly saying since I manage this, but like it was just that's not something I expected, because it's not like we're supporting Swift in terms of how we communicate our REST APIs. Like we don't have a Swift SDK, for example. But he also was really excited about like we've invested in our tooling in a way that we didn't on V2, like a Postman collection. Having an official Postman collection has made like 1 and not 5 or whatever else is like made a lot of difference to certain developers. So I'm really excited about the feedback that we're getting from folks.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I can definitely vouch for the Postman collection being just almost like a developer marketing tool. Like by making it available, you're really allowing a big range of people to experience your API without necessarily having to drop down into an IDE. Now you talked about how you're not storing the messages and information on your servers now. Has there been improvements in the APIs that you're connecting to that's enabled you to do this? I'm wondering, like, what was the trigger that brought about this new version, or were customers telling you we want it to be better in these specific ways? Like, how did you guys come up with this plan?
Well, I think a lot of it comes down to, and I think a lot of it comes down to the fact that if you do have to do something where you're like syncing a bunch of data between first the provider and Nylas, that initial like hello world call that we talk a lot about in developer relations, like that took a while. And on V2, and you weren't getting like that instant sort of result, and it was kind of hard to like build in enough sort of like guardrails or error handling or loader animations or whatever into a hello world to like make people feel like, oh, okay, I get this. So I think that's got a lot to do with it, to be quite honest. Is just like the ability to just go faster. That obviously matters when you're integrating an API into your production application, but it, especially for what we do as developer relations folks, like that's the first foot you're putting in the door, and you don't want to be like, yeah, come back in a minute or whatever. And so I think that's a big part of it, and that's part of what makes it fun. Is a lot more instant gratification.
Yeah, it's almost like how Twilio was able to use the fact that you could send an SMS message within seconds on a demo on a big stage to the entire audience. Like that sort of stuff really wows people and wows developers. So I can definitely see how that would be a priority. But when you go from when you do a big upgrade and you're going from V2 to V3, there's a lot of things that have to be updated. There's a lot of change management, whether it's SDKs or documentation. Like, how did you approach that change management with your community?
Yeah, it's such a a massive topic that I feel like we've just been talking about for 9 months or more at this stage. And yeah, so I'll do my best to sort of remember various slices of that history. For one, like we started with the private preview. So one of the things our docs team, again, giving them a seat at the table, like could really come in when that team first started about a year and a half ago now. And a few months in, like really set like, okay, we're not going to do something where we just kind of like make up labels of like, oh, this is a beta, this is a whatever, and then get people on it, and have them not totally understand. Like we've actually documented like, here's our product life cycle in terms of like we do, and I won't remember this off the top of my head exactly, but I think it's like we do a private preview, then we'll do a beta, then we'll do GA, and then eventually if we're sunsetting stuff, like that's a whole thing. So the cool thing was having the ability to do first a private preview gives you the chance to find those customers or those developers who are kind of like the folks that are rooting for you, and really kind of kick the tires on something knowing that it won't be the best, right? Because it's so early on, which enables a nice feedback cycle to be able to open up a beta. This, if I remember right, this may be the first time we've really done like a longer form public beta at Nylas. So what I mean by that is like we could just like put a page on the docs that says like, hey, do you want access to our upcoming API version in the form of a beta? Put your name here, name and email kind of thing. We did want to gate it, but we're pretty permissive with it. So for example, our developer advocates were, I think in August, they ran an online hackathon that was all about like, let's mix up Nylas and LLMs. Super fun. And one of the keys to participating was like, you got to be on our beta. Because we wanted that feedback from, regular developers, right? People who were just trying it for the first time. And then that dovetailed right into Hacktoberfest in October. And there we did the same thing. We worked with community developers to create small apps, or if they wanted to, they could help us port code samples on GitHub from V2 to V3. And the great thing about that was like when they're doing it, they don't have that burden of like knowledge, right? They're trying it for the first time, and wow, do we get some fantastic feedback while also prepping for shipping a robust developer experience for V3.
Yeah. That is great. I really appreciate you sharing that, because I imagine there's other folks that are thinking about a big migration like this and how they might do it in a controlled way, but also inviting those champions on to give you that honest feedback about how it's coming along and where the rough edges and things like that.
I would say that like on that front, by the way, like especially if you're DevRel, right? If you're in DevRel and you're working with product management, like I've seen this over and over again where product managers, as they're getting closer to putting something out in the world, can get into this place where they're like, well, it's not quite ready. We don't want to just like open it up, and we don't want people banging the door down for our beta. And the reality is like, if you have that critical mass of audience, it. Like those people aren't just going to come from nowhere. You really do have to cultivate it. So I think this is, if you really are trying to optimize for feedback, the sooner you can engage with your developer advocates to get out there and say like, hey, we got a beta and we got some fun stuff you can do with it. Let's play. That's you're not going to get inundated with 10,000 developers overnight.
Yeah, I actually think I've observed that it's a little bit of the reverse, where you open the beta and you get very little adoption, and you end up reversing that, where you go out and identify 10, 15, 20 developers that you know from the past, you have a good relationship, and you actually encourage them to come on and try this. Because it's funny that beta flag can scare developers a lot, where they don't want to invest because they're like, well, it's not fully baked, I don't really want to touch this yet. And the reality is it is very, very baked quite often. It's just we aren't we just want to get some real live data going through this API before we really go GA and invite everyone along, right?
That's right. So like if you've got developer advocates at your company, like let them handle that. Like you as the product manager, for example, like you don't need to like deal with every developer showing up on your beta. Developer advocates can engage and then filter that feedback in a way that like however you need it, so that you don't feel overwhelmed as like a single product manager, for example. So I'm a huge believer in like that's kind of part of like helping people understand like what does your developer advocate side of the house do on a DevRel team, and this isn't of course the only thing by any stretch, but that's a huge thing that they can contribute. And what you end up with is potentially new relationships, right? New fans of the product who got a lot of one-on-one engagement with people at the company, and ultimately you're going to ship a way better API because real developers tried it.
Absolutely. Good advice. You touched on SDKs, one of my favorite subjects. I've been working with them for many years now. I'm always curious about um, general questions like how did you decide what languages you wanted to support, and like who's actually building them? Do you have an engineering team dedicated, or do you have dev advocates contributing? What's your sort of makeup over there?
So you may be shocked by this answer, but our SDKs predate my joining the company. So like how those were chosen, I've asked about that before, but I think there were some of it was just about like customer request, to be honest, like as we were working through sales to understand like what customers would want. um, but we have a single SDK engineer handwriting all of the stuff, and
Wow.
wow, he is an Moose is his name, up in Toronto, and we love him. He even when we did a like different kinds of, I don't know, talking about developer content or whatever, oftentimes we'll want to chat with him about his thoughts on it, and he does a great job. Our developer advocates, they do contribute back to the SDKs more than they used to, for sure. So I think with us, it's just we're such a small team. We if The rules of the road there are essentially like if you can jump in and you see like, okay, here's probably where it is, get the pull request in, and then we'll have our SDK engineer vet that, or at least submit the issue. And all of our SDKs are open source. So that's the other part that the developer advocates can jump in and contribute to is, we talked earlier about let's have a perspective on like, where is the community talking? But at the same time, we still need to meet people where they are. So just today, we had someone come in and submit an issue against the Node.js SDK. And one of our developer advocates, Ram, is already on the case. And I love that we can contribute that because Moose is absolutely amazing as an SDK engineer, but I also try to be super mindful that he's one person. And I think it's important that we can pick up our share of the load on that.
Yeah, that sounds like a really smart approach where your dev advocates are handling a lot of that open source community engagement as much as they can, and you've got the engineer focused on doing the coding. Do you also find, or have you found that the community has created their own SDKs and open source those? And if so, do you talk about them or promote them in any way?
We don't. So one, yes. I know that there's a group out there that has created a PHP SDK for Nylas. Again, one that predates my time. We haven't engaged too much, simply just like due to our time, right? Like it's something that we haven't quite dug into yet, and I want to be super mindful when we do, to kind of like make sure that everyone engaging understands that like if the community built it, this is the community's thing. And so we haven't really had much of a formal approach to that at all at this stage. I love to see it though. I think anytime someone engages at the code level, whether it's like submitting an issue, we have a joke. We have a joke internally, but I'm just like, anytime someone submits an issue, I just use the socks emoji. I'm like, that person gets socks. Someday we want to send all of our open source contributors, including the issue submitters who are absolutely contributors, we want to give them socks. We're not quite
Un-
at a place where we could pull off those logistics, but I'm like, issues, yes, we love it.
yeah.
You know what I mean? As long as they're kind, and honestly, they always have been, and hopefully provide enough information that then we take it and run with it. PR
Oh,
is even better.
yeah. Well, I think you and I have the same mindset. One holiday season, my our head of platform came to me and said, we get contributions for around our SDKs and things like that. We have people who were maintaining open source ones. Let's find out. Let's get their addresses. Let's send them. I think we had socks, we had stickers, we had maybe T-shirts even, but we like identified the top 15, 20 contributors and reached out, got their mailing addresses, and sent them a little thank you for the holidays. Just we did it just 1 year, but it would have been nice to automate that sort of acknowledgement, because they were always sharing on social media like, oh, look at this great thing, they're so we're so happy to be part of the community, that sort of thing. It just reinforces that love.
100%. Yeah, I mean, the ability to even pull that off once, I have a ton of admiration for. Just the logistic challenges of like, let's collect, you know, addresses and then like deal with international shipping and get socks made before, within a year or whatever it is.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. The international shipping, that's what kills. We, at the time, we actually had a globally distributed team. So we had folks in the UK, the US, New Zealand, Australia. So we just sort of farmed out the postage to those teams and made sure they all of them had some swag available that they could engage. But yeah, that's the dream, is to have that fully automated as far as collection of addresses and sending those out. Um, a topic I did want to touch on, which is uh, success, right? How do we measure success when it comes to our APIs or our developer programs? And I'm just wondering what you folks at Nylas are doing to put in place some kind of metrics around developer engagement, adoption, that sort of thing.
Sure. So I tend to think of these like metrics conversations as like you're going to get in, one type of conversation, like a 30,000 foot view of what it is. But like to every component, there's also like a zoom in version that you can look at, right? For example, time to first response. That's not on the forums. That's not 30,000 foot view at all. That's like a click into, okay, how are we measuring forums as a part of this whole thing? And I'll tell you this metrics conversation, it's been really interesting over the last year because DevRel used to roll up into marketing at Nylas. And so that was a very different conversation, and one where I learned an absolute ton. I have led developer relations to that point within product and within engineering, but that was the first time inside of marketing, where they have their own alphabet soup of things to communicate or how they communicate and all of that. But I got a deep education on funnel dynamics from our director of growth marketing, Joel, and he's been an amazing partner over since he joined Nylas a little over a year ago. These days we're in product, and so we're not necessarily like, I still care very much about the funnel. I've been fully brainwashed into that, and like to me, to a point where sometimes our SVP of product is like, like let's talk a little bit more about like mind share and those kinds of things, which I can't put on necessarily on a funnel. So it's great. Like in product, we're focusing in a lot more on, first of all, we're literally this week started penning a definition of like, when we say mindshare, what do we mean by that? I don't have an answer for you yet, but if you have one, you can tell me. The otherwise though, we're really looking at things like, ultimately, like, how can we get in front of more developers, and then how can we get them to move on to our free tier of, sign up and get on the free tier of our product. So about a year ago, we used to be like, you get a 14-day free trial and then you sign a contract style.
Yeah.
We moved to PLG last year about this time. Yeah, it's amazing, right? Because like, as a developer, right? Like with my developer hat on, like if you tell me that within 14 days, if you want to keep using this, you've got to have a conversation with somebody. I'm just not in it,
No.
and so the ability to ship a free tier that has some stuff I can just do with it, and I can put some things into prod and expect them to work on the free tier, and I can grow into paying for it, is important. So for us, like, it really is about how do we get more eyeballs on Nylas. I want to make sure people understand how to pronounce Nylas and all of that kind of stuff. They know what it is, and then they jump in and they're able to start building something cool. We focused on our docs rewrite for V3. We focused on what we're calling quick start guides, not a new term by any stretch of the imagination, but our expression of that is you go to a page and it says, hey, I want to be able to like send emails from a Node.js application or Python or Kotlin or whatever. You follow the steps and you have a real application going by the end of it, including setting up OAuth, which like our auth process got like so much better in V3 that like we want to make sure that we're not giving developers a crutch in the beginning on like, go to our dashboard, we'll give you a fake credential or whatever. It's like, no, we're going to show you how to do this, and it's not that bad. So for us, like, that's a big piece of it, is like, how many people can we get moving into that? And I'm sure we will continue to embellish over time.
That's great. I love hearing the enthusiasm in your voice when you're talking about all these great improvements you're doing for your customers and for developers. But I do want to make sure we have time to talk about what you shared last week. I hinted that we were going to get there last week at the Austin API Summit, because you were talking about AI and APIs. And so you're like melding everyone's two favorite things, I think, peanut butter and chocolate. So can you tell me, like, what were the key takeaways from this talk that you did?
Yeah, sure. I think I started out the talk basically talking about, like, go back a year ago, I wrote a blog post on my website about like what it means to encourage your DevRel team to start doing stuff with AI. Like, it feels like a million years ago now, but at that time, I don't know if this is like February or March, but GPT-4, I think, had only been public for a few months at that stage, and our CEO Gleb was really encouraging us to all like get in there and play with it. Right? He was like, more AI usage, and I felt like a lot of the ideas we were getting from the DevRel team had a lot to do with product features, and those are welcome. We need to communicate those to the PMs, but there were other things we could be doing, including if we know that real world developers are gonna want to start putting LLMs into their applications, and if they're integrating Nylas at the same time, well, how do you even start, right? Like, I think back then it felt a bit intimidating, simply because there was just sort of like AI AI sort of like wizard on top of mountain speak, and it all sounded overwhelming. Like, I'm not an AI expert whatsoever, and so it just felt like that probably was like, maybe this isn't for me. It's like for the imposter syndrome of, this is probably for smarter people than I. But the reality was, well, if we know developers need to do it, then we should get in there first and try to figure it out, maybe save the developers a few steps. And so that's what we started focusing on. So the talk really kind of went from, okay, great, so we're focusing on what I was referring to as like the mere mortal developer, right? Regular developers who aren't data, LLM scientists, AI scientists, or anything like that. They just want to build something cool, sprinkle a little bit of AI magic into their application, and most importantly, learn by doing. We're not going to give you a bunch of white papers in the beginning or anything like that. Mad props to anybody who learns that way, but that is not me. So yeah, the rest of the talk was really just about like showing a sample application where built a simple UI. You connect your Gmail account to this sample application, and then once you're connected through OAuth, again, way easier to do in V3. I love it. Then we that application goes from there, and it just like reaches out to whatever LLM you have selected in the UI. So what I wanted to demo on the other side of all of this was like, at the code level, if you're talking to OpenAI APIs, this is what your code's probably going to look like, at least at its most basic. If you're talking to LLMs on Hugging Face, this is what it's going to look like.
Yeah.
And what's super cool is if you're using Ollama to run models locally on your machine, no cloud, right? Like this is what that code will look like. And I'll tell you, if you ever want to do a tech talk and really build suspense, like use a MacBook Air with an M2 to run a model locally. I think I was running Llama 2 locally. It didn't take forever, but right about the time I was giving up, I was like, tech demos. And then I was about to click away and then boom. And I don't know, it suddenly felt like everybody in the room was like, okay, we did it. We did it together. So that's what the talk was about, was really like, all right, look, you can just jump in and start coding this stuff. Like you don't need to learn a million things up front. You're going to learn them as you go. It's still something new. You're going to learn things, but you get to do stuff. And ultimately what the whole sample application that I was showing off would do was it would, use Nylas, read in, like, I don't know, I had it set to like 10 emails or something from Gmail. And then it would pass those off to whatever LLM you had selected in the UI. And then it would come back and it would show you a summary of those emails. So you just get like a TLDR. Pretty basic use case, but the idea there was not to wow people with my application development skills. It was really just to say, like, if we can do this with just this amount of code, sky's the limit. And by the way, here are a handful of things that you might have to learn along the way that I'm probably not in the best position to teach you, like fine-tuning your models and, considering costs and how you run your models and stuff. So like, I'm trying to be open about, like, I'm showing you the front door, but there is going to be a journey on the other side. And, maybe we take it together. I heard from a few people after the talk that had a lot of really smart things to say. And so, yeah, I think one of the nice things about doing a talk sometimes is just like the audience will make you smarter on the other side of it, which is wonderful too.
Oh, that's awesome. Awesome. Well, I love to conclude interviews with a more fun question. So I'd love to find out from you. We've talked about AI, so it might be this, but I'm curious, do you have any tech predictions for 2024 and beyond?
Well, I do think there is some here in the AI space. It won't surprise anybody, I guess. But like for me, one, I think like the models are important, absolutely. But at the same time, like there are places that you can go to get models online now that are like record stores, and like that's pretty cool. And there's already big players that are so far ahead on the let's make a model and make it publicly available space that I think for me, like a lot of the interesting places are more about like how can you use APIs to open up data that isn't just like something that can be scraped from the web. Now, I have a bias here because like Nylas uniquely does that. It's like by definition, your emails are not on the web, hopefully, publicly where Google is indexing them. And instead, like if you want to be able to offer your customers something that's like a plus on top of their email or calendar experience, like we can pull in that data or let you pull in that data and then do smart things with it from there. So there's something about being able to, like, data still wins at the end of the day that I think is interesting. In addition to that, there's something about helping developers better prepare data that they're pulling from APIs to pass off to the LLM. I barely even know what I mean by that right now.
It sounds important though, right?
It does. But I mean, like, look, a lot of this is like these data transfer objects, right? Where you're just like, all right, I'm going to massage this data into a whole bunch of stuff and eventually it'll be a prompt or whatever. But I don't know, like maybe there's a smart thing we can do where it's like, all right, you already have access to all this data. Like, is there an alternate API we can offer to say, like, pull the data that's already ready for the LLM? So for example, this is a very simple example, but email, most of your email that comes to you is written in a very old version of HTML.
Yes.
And if you just pass that off to the LLM, like you're wasting bandwidth and money and time. So one of the pre-processing steps for me was just like, we're going to strip all the HTML out of this. We may lose something in the process, but I think it's better than the alternative of just passing this giant HTML page to the LLM. So could we make that easier for the developer, for example? Yeah, probably.
I like that. I really like that. Yeah, because I've worked at accounting platforms before. I think about LLMs in the perspective of how they're going to be leveraged to understand how a company's working, right? Like if I could get my invoice data and my expense data and feed it into an LLM and have it generate insights for me, I think that's probably being solved right now. Um, but it got me thinking along those similar lines that you're speaking of, which is AI is great for general knowledge, but I want to ask questions about myself to the AI and have the information and data to formulate insights about me and what I need, which is going to be pretty interesting, I think.
Yeah, and by the way, I may have something coming out about that later this year.
Oh, okay.
So one of the things that we're, and I won't go into details on that one, but one of the things we're encouraging our developer advocates to do right now is like, let's just build some fun little apps with Nylas and put them in prod and see if anybody gets a giggle out of them. So, or some utility, right?
Yeah.
So I'm working on one that's actually an expansion of that sample app from Austin API Summit. We'll see if that comes out, but later on, like I'm actually really interested in that too, which is like one of the least explored sort of aspects of ourselves is like the sort of quantitative aspect of like your inbox or your calendar, right? Like you don't see an aggregate view of that very often. Maybe you don't want to, but it might be worth looking at.
Well, and if you've been with the same email provider for 10 plus years, there is a treasure trove of information that you may or may not want to explore, but a lot of us probably have that. So I love that. I love that idea.
Do you have an email like 7 years ago that you forgot to respond to and you want to be reminded of it?
Yeah, exactly. Those an old friendship might be rekindled because of what the AI can find in my inbox.
That's absolutely fantastic, though. That's a fun use case. Yeah.
I love it. Well, you know, Ash, thank you again for coming on to the podcast today and chatting with me. I've really enjoyed our conversation. We've explored some really interesting topics, and I hope that everyone got a great got as much out of it as I did. Before we go, do you want to plug your podcast because you're doing what I'm doing, but in a slightly different angle? Maybe other people want to hear more from you.
Oh yeah, thank you. So I have a podcast that I do with one of the group product managers for APIs at Adobe that I used to work with. Her name is Carrie Schatz. Our podcast is called "I'd Rather Be Scripting," and it's just about like regular developer stuff that sometimes we found as our careers progressed we didn't get to play with as much and we wanted an excuse. So she and I just like to get on and like say like, hey, what you been hacking on, or what's like interesting to you. And I think recently she's been diving into like she had built her own retro computer in software, but is now kind of trying to see how to translate that into hardware, and that's like well beyond me. But there's always some fun topics like that, and honestly it's just about what are you excited about when it comes to scripting or coding, and hopefully people will find it fun and just a light listen.
Awesome. Well, thanks again. And thanks everyone for joining us. And we'll catch you all soon.
Said thank you.
Take care.